We have had a very motivational start already with the Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Virender Sharma ji, speaking and really motivating all of us and getting the emotional quotient of Indians and Indian boys and girls, really very motivated. So thank you very much for your very valuable and motivating comments. And likewise to Dr. Ruth Katumuri for her objectivity in terms of the future of LSE and bringing the future to the present. Her very insightful comments were very encouraging, even for me as a seasoned banker with many years, to understand that she's got a perspective, she's got a vision to motivate all of you into your professions, into your entrepreneurial careers. You know, very wonderful comments were made by Ruchi. I'm indeed very happy to be here. You know, Saturday morning is not always easy. You know, for most of you, for me, it's okay. You know, I had to sacrifice my morning walk in Hyde Park because this is a treat when I come from Bombay to London. But this is far more important. I can sense when I look at the faces, you know, young faces, very bright faces, and for some reason, today the girls outnumber the boys. I don't know how that is the case. It's an observation. It's an observation, and I'm a little biased also because I'm a father of 3 daughters. And one of them is studying also in London, and she's graduating pretty soon. And so a little biased, but I must say that this is a very impressive collection and aggregation. And I'm very happy to read this morning when I did that your students' club was ranked, I gather, as the best one last year. I was told in my briefing notes. So I'm very happy to be here with the South Asia Center, LSE, the Students' Union Society, and the Indian Observatory for organizing this session. India's global footprint and growing that naturally in today's scenario when there are a lot of exogenous issues, there are a lot of economic challenges, is naturally a subject of considerable discussion. And young ladies and gentlemen, that when we look at India at a tipping point, at an inflection point, you will recognize that we have certain demographics, certain characteristics which are like fantastic. I think the new government, with the best of intentions, with very good intentions, has launched certain visionary programs, and I don't speak for them, I speak as an independent, that make in India, you know, digital India, startup India, stand-up India, which is like a execution statement, are reasonably visionary blueprints. Because if you imbibe all of that and get little, like, you know, motivated with that, and you realize that this is like something which is very consequential, which is happening in our economy, in our young economy, in our young and dashing economy. And I think the Prime Minister of our country, his intentions are very good. I think he's built global credibility for our nation, which was set back for a few years. And to me, that is very important because nation building also requires brand building. Because brand building of a nation is about confidence, it's about conviction, it's also about being able to communicate. So when these 3 C's come together, and the 4th C is a charming Prime Minister, at least I like to believe that we are reasonably on the right track in terms of global vision. But we have inheritance, we have legacy issues, which sometimes are significant speed breakers. So I like to believe that the land of a billion ideas sincerely, and I'm a great believer because my career represents that against adversity, is a land of a billion opportunities. I really believe so. When you look at the circumstances, I think all of you recognize that the global circumstances with slowing growth in emerging markets and a reasonably tepid uplift in the advanced economies, that it's not a very favorable overall scenario in totality. As I'm sure you know, that IMF little bit compromised on the growth scenario for calendar 2016 from 3.6% to about 3.4%. It sends a message. It's not a bad message, but it sends a message that growth is not going to really look up. And if you look at at least five transitions, this is supposed to be finance and economics, right, this session. The 5 transitions which are happening in the global economy, we all know the commodity prices and its impact on exporters results in a very sluggish global backdrop. Naturally, the connotation around that is deflation. So there is, deflation, which is a consequence. The rebalancing and the correction of the Chinese economy is a very important observation that I encourage this very bright group of students to observe, because it's a tectonic shift, because what is happening there is from investment and manufacturing. The shift is towards, as you all know, consumption and services. So this is a very big factor today in finance and economics globally, because this moves the pendulum, not by degrees, but sometimes very severely, because now it's not like America sneezing and rest of the world catching a cold. It's quite now China. So we must observe China very carefully because of their 10 trillion economy. It's still 50% America, but still it does have a tectonic impact on global movements, right? And then you see the 4th transitory factor. There is a very contrarian monetary policy in advanced countries, and I think we all know that there is a federal monetary movement in America which is moderating, interest rate shifts upwards, and rest of the world is moving towards softening minus interest rates. So even in advanced countries, which are capital suppliers for growth for their domestic home country economies, for global economies, that there is a very significant move that the contrarian monetary policies today are creating also a lot of volatility. The net result of this is volatility, because if America says interest rates are going up, and Japan and European Union and Switzerland and Denmark and I think Sweden, which are somewhat out of the EU, are moving towards almost 0.5% minus rates, then certain things are not moving. So monetary policy shifts is a very important global transitory movement happening. The 5th point I really want to underscore is that domestic economies. The domestic economies are sometimes also creating geopolitical tensions. It's important to understand that geopolitically, that there is stress in the economies, which is also accreting, and that is something that we need to also observe very carefully. In this backdrop, India looks pretty okay. I don't want to make a comment that it's like a hunky-dory story, because India also has its own, shifts and balances. So, but nevertheless, the good thing is that a few things that matter. I think the budget this year, I gave it 9 out of 10, and I got criticized immensely. And then 4 days later, on the first day of the budget on 29th, I was the only guy in the whole banking system, the whole economic system who gave 9 out of 10, and the average was 5 out of 10 in CNBC and Ichi Now. And it was not to do chamchagiri. It was, I tell you very honestly, to be very frank and honest, it was my observation that given the circumstances, that this was a pretty damn good budget because it has addressal for key issues in our economy. It really focuses on some real fundamentals, and which is why I'm not saying thereafter, because I don't invest in the equity markets. My only stock is Yes Bank. But it did very well. For 4 days in a row, because 29th was a Monday, until Friday, 4th of March, the stock markets did very well because they understood one thing, the fiscal discipline, rank one. You have to understand that the hard wiring of fiscal objectives, the 3.6 achievement, and then like giving direction, the 3.9 giving direction to 3.5 next year, and then hardwiring fiscal 18-19 to 3% under the current FRBM, which is the Fiscal Responsibility Bill of the Nation, is a very important objective to realize. So in a way, I think the fiscal discipline message, because you can get growth, but you can like go crazy sometimes if you don't, have a lid on fiscal expenditure. So I think this is a very good message, because what it means, because, we have a Reserve Bank of India, which has been like fighting inflation for the last, 4-5 years, 5-6 years actually, and not achieving a whole lot till recently. The recent achievements, when you look at CPI, when you look at the wholesale WPI, which has been really the predominant factor in the past, and then India moved all the way to like CPI, is that we have got all the objectives on inflation as determined by the Reserve Bank of India very much in place. I'm very happy that now we have a backdrop, a fantastic backdrop with fiscal dispensation, with fiscal achievement, that for Reserve Bank of India to reduce the real rates in the economy. Because you are students of economics and finance in this wonderful, iconic college, that you have to recognize and appreciate that now India is looking at real rates coming down, because we have right now very high overall real rates in the economy, and partly because sometimes it's not about the domestic economy, that real rates being high also cushions the impact of foreign exchange movements. That's the second factor, because higher interest rates sometimes also create currency stability. And I think Reserve Bank of India is not only looking at inflation, but it's also making sure that the safety nets are there vis-a-vis foreign exchange volatility in our economy. I think it's pretty good under the circumstances. It is fairly well known, and I'll skip a little bit, that India's, and this was also meant to be a subject of discussion in this speech today, that the slowdown in China and its impact on India is a very important factor as well. I hinted at that. I think Madam Christine Lagarde, just last week, we spent some time with her in Delhi, made a statement that China's growth could be like upgraded. So it's not like China is, doomsday. China is correcting, and because they're so committed and focused judgmentally, in her opinion, in her assessment, it could correct sooner than later. And I think this was a very important message, because she's a very experienced leader of the world, and they analyze China's impact on the world considerably. So it's not like China is tanking and the rest of the world is also going to tank as a consequence. India's dependence on China is fairly marginal, because only 3.8% of our exports go to China. And almost 13% of our imports come from China, amazingly in the blue economy, in blue manufacturing. And it's a reasonably big number, but it should help India. It should help India because lower import prices, right? India's own exports are not a very big number because we are not an export-oriented economy. We are a home country economy. So our predication on exports is only like 20%, right? And it is a fairly diversified export base, even though its numbers are not very, very motivating. More recently, if you see, India's exports are slowing down because it's in tandem with the rest of the world economy. But the important thing is that most of the merchandise trade is fairly granular, but more importantly, almost 52% of our exports are services. The services exports are a lot more resilient in the totality of our economy. So we will have setbacks with global, sluggishness, but the overall services aspect is a composition, is an insulation in the totality of our export basket. I think the Chinese economy slowdown, cameras is good for India. Is keeping a current account deficit in check around 1-ish%, which was runaway 2013, July to September period, when we had to also pursue unconventional economic policy in our country, and which resulted in naturally a lot of volatility in the Indian rupee at that time. So it's almost 2.5 years ago. But the fact is that the rupee had a soft landing because of real action. But commodity prices do help lower commodity prices. We all know helps India because we are probably the second largest consumer. China still is the largest consumer despite its little slowdown. But we are still like the beneficiary of commodity prices. And the outlook, when I read Financial Times, which I do most days, and I encourage all of you to read that because it really helps your globalization, your knowledge, that overall this is a helpful situation. And it's not like very difficult to recognize that even though slower exports and tepid imports relatively is still resulting in a current account deficit of only around 1.5%, which is a very important number because 1 to 1.5% makes sure that India is not in trouble on the export and import basket, but is significantly insulated by incoming remittances. Thanks to honorable members like Mr. Sharma and many others here in this room, that last year we had 72 billion. When I say last year, it was fiscal 15, because fiscal 16 is still not printed. But judgmentally, I think it will be around at least 75 and maybe even closer to $80 billion because of negative rates. Naturally, the non-resident Indians will invest more and more in India. So $72 billion, which is more than what China gets, amazingly, far more than what Philippines gets from its NRIs, that this more than insulates currency risk in our country because that is a very, very important factor in a very distorted global economy. I mentioned to you briefly my interaction with Madam Christine Lagarde only last week. India is really the shining spot in a global economy that is otherwise a little bit gloomy, quote unquote. And she means business. Huh? She's a real world leader, right? And if you look at America also, as it corrects its own economic imbalances, their main issue today is the pivot. The pivot is Asia. Even America is recognizing, even before the elections, that the resurgence of America is going to pivot around Asia. And within Asia, India's story is pretty okay. This budget, 2016, 29th of Feb, it was a leap year, so we had one extra day, had 9 very good fundamentals, very good pillars. I'm sure some of you, most of you would have followed, because it was the entirety of the budget that is very consequential, because sometimes you get lopsided only on taxes and benefits and reliefs. To me, the messaging on agriculture and farm welfare, number 1. Number 2, because there are 9 pillars, right? And I can elaborate, but I think we're running out of time. Second pillar was on the rural sector, with emphasis on rural employment and rural infrastructure. This was a program actually conceived by one of our ex-presidents, Abdul Kalam. It was called Bharat Nirman. It was called Pura, but the budget will not recall that. But I recall in my economic, knowledge, that the Pura was provision of urban services to rural areas. So this budget has the manifestation of some of these very key elements, because rural infrastructure is very fundamental to India, and there are like 6 elements to that, which I think have been largely covered through this Bharat Nirman Pura, as reflected in the overall, in the totality of this budget. I think the third pillar, which was fairly significant in this budget, was the social sector, naturally including healthcare. And I think there are enough elements in this budget on healthcare contact. Education, skills, job creation, number 4 pillar in the budget. Infrastructure and investment, to me the most important. I don't know why it came 5 in the order of the finance minister's statement, but infrastructure and investment and capital formation are absolutely mission critical for India's economic recovery, as well as India's economic takeoff. The single biggest opportunity, I think, when I meet the people as I do, that when you look at, there are 8 or 9 ministries in India which really manage infrastructure. I wish there was like a super minister in addition to the prime minister who was looking at infrastructure. There are 8 ministries. But the good thing is roads and shipping, which is under 1 minister, I think are moving fairly well ahead. Power, renewable energy, the coal, which is also under 1 minister, is doing respectably well. And I think aviation, the buttons are being pressed, and it'll probably get better. Urban infrastructure, very important opportunity in India is on urban infrastructure. The smartization of our cities, in my judgment, is going to be like a hell of a big opportunity, especially for urban ventures. So I think the strategic repositioning of India's infrastructure is beginning to happen, but contractual frameworks still need to be tested. I think the 6th pillar was more to do with financial sector reforms, on greater transparency, on more stability, on the governance of and ease of doing business, on overall fiscal discipline, as I commented very briefly earlier. And most of all, what creates a lot of uncertainty in India is domestic and global taxation. Because we have too much of a backlog and uncertainty on global taxes, and especially retrospective taxes on some leading multinationals, and including what is still perceived to be tax terrorism in domestic taxation. So this needs to be sorted out as well. I think the objective of this speech was not just to analyze India, and also to really do a stock take of what's happening on entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship in India in itself is by far one of the most fantastic opportunities. There is a very important stratospheric movement happening, and I'll share some data points with you. In January, as of January end, there were 19,400 technology-enabled startups. Out of this 19,000, 5,000 started in 2015. Very important. And no less than 2,000 of the startups have been backed by venture capital and angel investors. So 2,000, out of that 1,005, this is like straight from NASSCOM website, so this is not just, early morning data, but 1,005 out of there were 2,015 startups out of the 5,000, which have been enabled. And about $3.5 billion of capital has been infused in Indian startups. It's not a very big number when you compare it to America, but in rupee parity terms, purchasing parity terms, it's fairly reasonable. And it's increased, the number of investors have increased in less than 1 year from 2014 to 2015, from 220 to 490 like key investors, the ones who are really investing in Indian entrepreneurship. To me, that's also a very, very consequential number. I don't know how much time I have. I've probably exceeded everything.
0.
Huh? Huh? 0 time. Right. We started a little late also, my session. I'll cut the detail, but very important to really reflect, and this is something I take personal pride, and I've spoken on this subject in convocation once or twice in small universities in India, because that's really a lot of fun, The big guys don't need me, it's the small guys in Nagpur and where I like to go and a few other places. And I made this point, that India is going through DICE. What is DICE? This is a copyright of mine. Design, innovation, creativity-driven entrepreneurship. Design, innovation, creativity-driven entrepreneurship. To me, this is what is happening in India. And to me, this is the shift from the left mind, which is, as you know, the typical, meticulous, logical, and the very rational mind, which is where the Indians belong normally, very, very mechanical. But the shift that is happening through our demographics, through our boys and girls, people like you, I hope in the future increasingly so, is to really look at the right mind, the whole new mind. The whole new mind is about the right mind, the right brain. This is not it's really the way it is developed. That the right mind must create more and more creative entrepreneurship, more and more disruption in technology, more and more entrepreneurial establishments in our country, and which is why I love to be here. It happened in Silicon Valley 20, 30 years ago. And I think India is probably going through that because we have been like a white-collar factory on services technology. We do all this BPO business, which is like plenty, but no product. We have to get into product so we can build the apples. One day, Yes Bank will be the apple of banking, I promise you that. And that's the direction we are moving in. My notes are fairly long, on entrepreneurship, particularly on 5, which is the concept on funding, incubation, investing, and expansion. But I'll cut that and come to what I think is very important.
It could come in the Q&A discussion. It could come
in the discussion. That what is very critical, what is very mission critical, honestly, is that the second largest innovation platform in the world, number one, of course, we all know, is United States of America, is amazingly United Kingdom. So I think boys and girls like you, creative leaders of the future like you, must look at building this pipeline of ideas, of generation, as the Honorable Member of Parliament, Mr. Sharma, alluded to only a little while ago. You must build on this because to me, this is where the future lies. This is where the future opportunities are. And yes, many of you will go into professional jobs and family businesses, but there is nothing more fantastic than entrepreneurship. I'm delighted to be in LSE with this group of youngsters and with some formidable leaders. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Mr. Rana. That was
This is fairly recent, am I?
no, no. I think that's actually futuristic and very important and crucial for India. For the interest of time, I think we're going to go quickly into question and answers. Any questions? Okay, so gentlemen, 1, 2, and 3. Yeah, you first. Bye-bye.
Oh, thank you very much. Dr. Kapoor, Bush, Manchester. A lot of my friends who are in business in UK, in importing goods from abroad, Indian origin, find it very, very, very discouraging to import anything from India because they find that the manufacturers and producers are very, very unreliable, including giving a specific excuse that you have made so much profit in doing business with us in the past, so write off that against any unreliability costs. And this message is very disturbing every time I talk to even some leading business people in this country with whom I'm associated.
If you could
and
be
I want
brief,
I want to convey through you that what can be done to improve the reliability of Indian suppliers to those who want to import from India.
Thank you.
Carol O'Connor, private business person. You mentioned remittances as a source of stability, but in terms of long-term growth of a powerful, wonderful country like India, I can't imagine that remittances could be a sustainable stabilizer. So if you could comment on what you think the future would be in a remittance, when remittances become unnecessary.
Sure, sure. Cool.
In India, when someone's really worried about banks, they talk about the non-performing assets of public sector banks. So I was wondering, is this an exaggerated problem, or is it under control by Dr. Rajan? Also, on a side, I've heard Vijay Mallya is hiding in London, in case you want to...
They're probably taking a long walk in Regent Park. But if I can maybe respond to this, Ruth, with your approval.
Three. Oh.
I think on the, what you said about the export, issues, India still needs to build quality assurance. We need a lot of certification programs, and we need to naturally make sure that the Ministry of Commerce and Industry is able to create certain quality ISO equivalent benchmarks. And I think it can be done on product. It can be done with the right commitment. There are enough trade associations which need the right representations. The export-import associations in India are very, 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 very motivated. The problem is that we don't have the quality controls as prescribed in certain industries. So I think that is the need of the hour, which the Commerce and Industry Ministry can percolate. And if you have a representation, I'll be very happy, because I've been a head of a chamber till very recently to represent that. But to come to the next point, I think the next point was on the remittances. Indian NRIs, as you know only too well, are a very large population. I think there are about 25 million, 2.5 crore people around the world. And it's about interest rates and partly about, family commitments, and partly also about, being able to meet household requirements within the families. So this is the number that, irrespective of the interest rate sensitivity, has been growing in absolute terms and even in percentage terms, even correspondingly year on year. And I think this is a very resilient number, and more global uncertainty. And with minus interest rates, this number will be fairly insulated. And if at all, I think it will only grow, because the opportunity in India in real terms is a little bit more, plus household commitment. So I think the $72 billion last year should accrete even more going forward. But this is the number that doesn't go out. The good thing is it's not something which is volatile, it's not speculative. It's a number that is fairly, resilient and fairly dynamic. And I think this number will continue to grow. On public sector banks, it's a tragedy because if I can really get to the roots, because this is a very fundamental and headline issue in India right now, that public sector banks were used in India for fiscal dispensation. Because India could not afford, like in the advanced world, to use Uncle Sam and to use, the overall, Federal Reserve banks to give to dole out, right, to create the economy stimulation. So in India, the vehicles that were applied for monetary easing, quantitative easing, were public sector banks. When we had the impact of the Bear Stearns and Lehman, the global crisis in 2008-9, which perpetuated into the Eurozone crisis, and then India's own crisis in October 2011, the overall economic precipitation that happened. So Indian banks were used as vehicles for liberal lending because the government did not have the purse strings to really use their coffers, and our central bank, as in Reserve Bank of India, cannot do it, right, under our constitution. So these banks were used, and now because of that precipitation, with the lag effect, they have suffered, and they are reflecting, their report cards are reflecting this perpetuation on their balance sheets. It's called nowadays the 12 balance sheet problem, because one side naturally is the asset quality, on the other side is the corporate risks which have got perpetuated, and some of the companies, as was stated in the economic survey, last month, is the Chakravyuh. How do you get out of that? It's not difficult. It can be sorted out. It can be done pretty easily. It's not an endemic problem. It's a problem that can be resolved if there is laser focus on resolution. And I think the key industries that were suffering, infrastructure, and I spoke about that as an opportunity and adversity. I highlighted that the 8 subsections of infrastructure in India represent terrific opportunity. But the fact is that textiles were sluggish because of global impact, so that will be a sluggish recovery. Steel, because of overall dumping, but China, Japan, and Korea is going through protectionism, and therefore the recovery there is going to be steady, but will come back. It's becoming EBITDA positive, that particular sector. Roads was in a bad state, in a fairly bad state. I think it's getting better because of focused, completion of projects, and that is getting into a little bit of risk mitigation. So I'm concerned about public sector banks for the next 12 months. But I think we will tide this over, and fiscal 17-18 should be better.
Thank you. For interest, I think I'll just take one quick round, if you can be very brief. Well,
I
tough.
think the questions are brief, answers are long.
So the lady with the glasses, gentleman here, and I can take one more, maybe the man with the hat. Sorry. You could talk with him over coffee. Yeah.
Hi, this is Anjali Mittal. I want to talk about the FDI in the manufacturing sector. It's been particularly low in India as compared to China. India have recently eased off norms on FDI in certain industries, but will this be a problem in the future, and how can this be resolved specifically in the manufacturing sector?
It's a very good question because India's,
Shall we take all 3 questions together? Yeah.
Okay, all right. So
It's easier to.
Yeah. As long as you remember.
Yeah. No, just. Please use the mic.
What do you think about if India is keeping clashes with the neighbor countries, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Pakistan? So this policy will affect or damage this growing or not?
And the third question?
Yes, this is Suresh Deman.
Please use the mic.
Okay, sorry. Actually, I've been closely observing after the Modi government came to the power, the first budget, second, and the third recently. And the first budget was characterized as the Chidambaran budget, basically the Congress budget in a different way. And the second budget was more ambitious, Roti Kapda Makan, Bijli Pani, Suraksha, and what else? The Swasthta. Now,
So please be brief because
Yes.
we're running out
and the
of
third
time.
budget is based on the ninth pillar. So what is so different about this budget and how you evaluated the performance of the previous budget? Now the question to you is, because you talk about the current account deficit has been by and large 1 to 1.5%, but you haven't mentioned anything about the lower fuel prices, which has contributed a lot in actually macroeconomic stability rather than giving any credit to the present government.
Great, thank you. So you have 2
I think,
minutes to answer those questions.
Okay. Very brief on manufacturing, Make in India. I think it's about segmentation. Because India has to figure out where is the void and therefore where is the opportunity. Because, China conquered manufacturing and therefore we have to figure out, is it the space that China is going to vacate, which is the blue space, which is the low-end space, and to me that is not the opportunity for India. And we may lose time because of that. I think to me the opportunity in manufacturing is about very critical segmentation, whether it's automobiles, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's defense and nuclear and stuff like that. I think we have to be very clear in terms of prioritization of manufacturing and build global comparative and competitive advantage in manufacturing. And I think the secretary who's moved now as the CEO of the Planning Commission, Niti Aayog, Amitabh Kant, did a very good job in sorting out A and B, priorities on manufacturing. So India has to be very conscious about not making any mistakes. Because when China bounces back, which they will, that we should not be threatened by new initiatives. So I think we need to be very discerning and we have to force rank the opportunities in manufacturing. And I think we have enough window to be globally competitive in domestic manufacturing. Please realize India is always going to be a home country economy. It is not going to be really a global exporter. And I think the overall rebalancing of global economies after the global crisis is predominantly the 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule is, for heaven's sake, focus on domestics, right? Exports important, but it's not like mission critical. It's not going to upset the apple cart. So there the force ranking is very important. I think it's happening, but it can be far better from a practical sense. Intellectually, I think it's happening. Sir, आपका सवाल था, I want to understand that in terms of the South Asia region. I think the South Asian region, for a change, at least I like to perceive and believe that our country and our leadership is really standing out. We may not be doing it with our permanent enemy number one, but through hopefully cricket diplomacy, which is priority number 2, as I heard earlier this morning, that too will happen. I think India and our Prime Minister has made a very important emotional connect, brilliant connect, which was being neglected even with the smallest of countries like Maldives and Seychelles and forget Bhutan and Nepal and Bangladesh. I think Sri Lanka. This is to me a very important emotional chord because we are emotionally, and Burma also. I think we are very, very well connected, and I think to me the regional stability, political, economic, is going to resonate around the efforts of our Prime Minister because it was neglected for many decades. We neglected our own neighbor. Love thy neighbor became literally ignore the neighbor. So to me, this is a very important development. And sir, I did not forget your point. Sir, petroleum prices, commodity prices, and I said it in a slightly different context, but to be more specific, that while it's created a soft landing for the Indian economy, because petroleum is the single biggest import, and we all know that, even electronics is number 2, diamonds number 3, right? But the fact is that petroleum has really cushioned the economy. And the good thing is the government, for whatever reason, they are not transferred all of that benefit to consumers because they're using it for fiscal correction. And they're using it for also subsidy correction. One data point, because I had to skip my notes, 1.7 was the subsidy release last year to GDP compared to 2.4%, 3-4 years ago. Now, that is a very important fiscal correction because subsidies through Aadhaar, through electronic means and internet means, in itself is preventing, the leakages and all. So that correction is happening. And number 2, we are using this soft commodity cycle to also correct our economy. And correction in our economy is also happening, please remember, through probably one of the most aggressive policies on renewable energy. The most aggressive policy in the world today on renewable energy, particularly wind and solar, with a target of 170 gigawatts by 2022. And out of that, only 17, 18 has happened in the last 15 months. But it's a very good start. So energy correction, because that's like very, very important. Food correction, food security. So energy security correction is happening because of the predication on the economy. The food correction, in my opinion, is still like staggered. That will take some more time because we have not understood the food dynamics other than the fact that sugar is bouncing back. That correction is inevitable. The third, so food security, fuel security, the third F, which is financial services, is another area of massive attention that this government warrants. And to me, that is beginning to start. A lot more needs to be done on the 3 Fs, so food security, fuel security, and financial services.
Excellent. With that, I think really, sorry, we've run out of time. We've overstretched. And we are trying to break the Indian stretchable time trend. So thank you, Mr. Rana Kapoor, for your insightful and insider perspective and also helping us keep the time. Thank you very much.